Yeah, so I'm 𝗂𝗲𝗏𝗍𝗓. I'm now a senior lecturer at the Grantham Institute at Imperial College London, which is not the same as the Grantham Institute at LSE, but they are working close together, the two Grantham Institutes. And I have been working for a decade now as a climate scientist, in particularly on answering the question whether and to what extent human-caused climate change alters extreme weather events. And I have, together with my colleague 𝗙𝗲𝗏𝗲𝗏𝗏𝗲, we have developed an initiative which is called World Weather Attribution, where we tried and answer that question, what the role of climate change is in an individual extreme event when the events happen. So in the weeks and months after the event occur, so that the scientific evidence can be part of the public discussion of that extreme event. And yeah, so we started that work in 2014 and have been working on this project together ever since, until 𝗙𝗲𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 passed away last week.
Brought about that attribution, what came to mind that you had to come together to bring that on board?
So extreme weather events are of course often linked to losses and damages and cause huge suffering for the people experiencing that weather. And we have also known for a long time that human-caused climate change will manifest through the changing intensity and likelihood of extreme weather. But for a very long time, the scientific community has, when extreme events were happening and the question was asked, what's the role of climate change? There were two kinds of answers that the scientific community would give. The first one was that you can't attribute individual weather events. And the second one was that, well, we are living in a changing climate. So of course, this event is happening in a changing climate and climate change will have some influence. And the latter is trivially true, but it doesn't tell you anything about what the role is. Does it make it more likely or less likely, and by how much? And so that that was a big gap in what climate scientific research could do. And it also, we had observations on the one hand showing how things are changing on the ground, and then we had climate models and the community working with climate models on the other hand, looking into the future. But we didn't have any information of how these two come together in the present. So, and that's why we started to work on trying to answer these questions scientifically. So we started to do that in just standard scientific research, writing papers, submitting them to peer reviews. 2 years later, you have a published paper.
Okay, so what changes has this service brought to the climate world? We would want to understand that. I mean, after you brought this on board, have we seen some positive changes to the climate world?
Well, I think we are now, thanks to this work and this event attribution work that we have been doing, we now know much better what climate change actually means today and where we see how much change already, which and I think that has been particularly highlighted in the last IPCC report that was published in August, where for the first time we have an overview of climate change through changing likelihood and intensity of extreme events on a regional scale. And that has, I think it has really brought home that climate change is not something that's happening somewhere else and sometime in the future, but that it actually is already here and everywhere, and that in all societies, it's the most vulnerable in these societies that are paying the price of climate change already. So I think that understanding is something that we didn't have before we had the science. I think what is really the next thing that needs to happen is from this recognition to actually action, and that hasn't happened yet. And so I think one big thing that we really need to see is that adaptation gets put on equal footing to mitigation in the international climate talks, and that also climate finance is actually not just there in words, but in actual in actual monetary terms.
What is so unique about recent IPCC report? I mean, compared to the previous ones, people assume or they think that there is nothing new about the report, and it becomes so unnecessary according to people, those who have gone through the report. Yes, it becomes unnecessary when we keep on coming out with reports all the time without something new.
Well, I think there is definitely some truth in that a lot of the things that are in the report we have known for a very long time, but we still haven't acted on them. And I think we have known for a very long time that burning fossil fuels will warm the climate, and that this has detrimental effects on lives and livelihoods of people around the world. And we have now a lot more evidence of how exactly these detrimental effects play out. So how exactly are different types of extreme events changing? So that is new. That we don't need a new IPCC report to know that we need to stop burning fossil fuels. We have known that for a very long time. And so I think there are probably a lot more efficient ways of updating what is really new rather than all the time writing these massive reports. But there are some new things. And one important new thing is this much better information on regional scales, on how extremes and also other climatic impact drivers are changing. We now state it's a fact that the burning of fossil fuels leads to warming the climate, which of course is from a scientific point of view really not interesting, because we have also, before it was stated as a fact, it was clear, but politically that is important to see that every time we ask these questions, we get more and more certain about the answers. But I think probably the most important new message from the latest IPCC report is that we now know that when we get to net zero CO2 emissions globally, temperatures will actually stop rising. And that was not known so well before, because there are feedbacks like thawing of permafrost and so on, which could have led to temperatures still increasing even when we reach net zero. And that we are now quite certain that that's not the case is, I think, really important, because that means that we have it really in our hands to stop the warming.